Millionaire catches the black pediatrician breastfeeding his son and takes unexpected action. She pressed the crying infant to her chest, her voice barely a whisper in the mansion, as she made a decision that would cross every professional line she'd sworn to protect. What she didn't know was that in the doorway stood the grieving millionaire father, watching the woman who had unknowingly become his son's lifeline, and his own salvation. What happened next would shatter both their worlds and rebuild them into something neither had dared to dream. Before we start, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue. The November rain hammered against the windows of the Pemberton estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, each drop echoing through rooms that felt more like a museum than a home. Dr. Camille Washington adjusted her bright coral blazer and checked her watch 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that felt as gray as all the others since she'd started treating Oliver Pemberton 3 months ago. At 28, Dr. Washington possessed the kind of natural beauty that turned heads without trying. Her rich mahogany skin glowed with health, and her dark eyes held depths of compassion that had earned her a reputation as one of Connecticut's most sought-after pediatricians. Today, her hair was pulled back in a neat bun secured with a sunshine yellow clip that matched her optimistic spirit, though lately that spirit had been tested. She climbed the grand marble staircase, her professional heels clicking softly on the steps, past oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to judge her presence. The house screamed wealth, crystal chandeliers, antique furniture, Persian rugs worth more than most people's homes, but it felt empty, hollow. Like a beautiful shell with no soul inside. This isn't a normal house call anymore, she thought, quickening her pace toward the nursery. Baby Oliver's emotional distress is getting worse, not better. 3 months old and he barely sleeps, barely settles. My medical training tells me he's physically healthy, but my heart knows he's dying inside from lack of love. The nursery was a masterpiece of interior design. Soft blue walls, a hand-carved crib from Italy, medical-grade air purifiers, and toys that cost hundreds of dollars arranged perfectly on shelves. But it lacked the one thing that mattered: parental presence. Oliver lay in his crib, his tiny fists clenched, his face red from crying. At 3 months, he should have been cooing, smiling, reaching for things. Instead, he seemed to carry the weight of loss in his small body, as if he sensed his mother's absence and his father's abandonment in every breath. "Hey there, sweet boy," Dr. Washington cooed, lifting him gently with practiced medical precision. His cries intensified, and she felt that familiar tug in her chest, the one that reminded her of everything she'd lost 2 years ago. "I know, baby. I know it hurts." She'd been hired as Oliver's private pediatrician after his mother, Catherine, died in childbirth. What started as routine medical care had evolved into something far more complex. Jonathan Pemberton paid her an astronomical fee to make house calls 3 times a week, but she suspected it was more about easing his guilt than ensuring his son's health. The man hasn't been present for a single appointment, she thought, checking Oliver's vitals with one hand while bouncing him gently. Always in Tokyo, or closing a deal in London. His assistant Margaret probably knows more about this baby's daily routine than he does. Dr. Washington had graduated summa cum laude from Yale Medical School, completed her residency at Boston Children's Hospital, and built a thriving practice in Hartford. She was respected, successful, and financially independent. But standing in this nursery, holding this motherless child whose father was too broken to love him, she felt more helpless than she had since losing her own pregnancy 2 years ago. Meanwhile, 43 stories above Manhattan's financial district, Jonathan Pemberton stood at his office window, staring at the city below without seeing it. At 35, he was the kind of man who commanded rooms, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that was perpetually disheveled from running his hands through it when stressed. His green eyes, once bright with ambition, now held shadows that expensive suits couldn't hide. His assistant knocked. Mr. Pemberton? The Tokyo meeting is in 10 minutes. Right, he muttered, straightening his navy blue tie. Another meeting, another deal, another reason to stay away from Greenwich and the memories that waited there. 3 months, he thought. Oliver's been alive for 3 months, and I've missed every single pediatric appointment. Dr. Washington probably thinks I'm the worst father alive. The guilt was a constant weight, but the alternative, going home, facing that empty house, seeing his son's face and remembering Catherine's last words, felt impossible. Sir. His assistant's voice held concern. Also, Margaret called. She said Dr. Washington is with Oliver again today. The baby's been unsettled. He stopped walking. Margaret had been sending these updates for weeks, always praising the pediatrician, always hinting that he should come home. Dr. Camille Washington had become more than Oliver's doctor. She become his lifeline, the one constant in his son's life while Jonathan ran from his responsibilities. What kind of father pays a doctor to love his child because he's too broken to do it himself? The question had haunted him for months. Catherine died bringing Oliver into this world, and I can't even look at him without falling apart. Back in Greenwich, Dr. Washington had exhausted her medical arsenal. She'd checked Oliver's temperature, examined his ears for infection, tested his reflexes, reviewed his feeding schedule. Physically, he was perfect. Emotionally, he was starving. "What do you need, sweet boy?" she whispered, her professional composure cracking. "Your vitals are perfect, your growth is on track, but your soul is crying for something I can't prescribe." She thought of her own loss, the pregnancy that ended at 7 months, the baby she'd never held, the dreams that died in a sterile hospital room. She'd thrown herself into pediatrics afterward, thinking she could heal other children if she couldn't save her own. But Oliver was different. Oliver was breaking her heart daily with his need for love that his father was too wounded to give. The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows, and Dr. Washington realized they were truly alone in this mansion. Margaret had gone to the market, the cleaning staff had left early, and Jonathan Pemberton was undoubtedly in some boardroom somewhere, building his empire while his son cried for comfort that felt medically impossible to provide. But Dr. Camille Washington had never been one to give up on a patient in need. She'd taken an oath to first do no harm, and watching this baby suffer from emotional neglect felt like the greatest harm of all. Her medical training told her to maintain professional boundaries, but her heart knew that sometimes healing required going beyond what textbooks taught. Looking down at Oliver's tear-stained face, his tiny body trembling with need, she knew she was about to cross a line that could cost her everything. But some children were worth the risk. Even if it meant redefining what it meant to be a doctor, a woman, and possibly something more. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, its deep resonance echoing through the Pemberton mansion like a funeral bell. Dr. Camille Washington had been trying to soothe Oliver for over an hour, and nothing in her extensive medical training had prepared her for this moment of complete helplessness. She paced the nursery floor, Oliver's small body pressed against her shoulder, his cries now reduced to heartbreaking whimpers that somehow felt worse than his earlier wails. The baby's tiny fingers clutched desperately at her coral blazer, as if he sensed she was his only anchor in a world that had already taken so much from him. "Shoo, sweet angel," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "Dr. Camille's here. I'm not going anywhere." But even as she spoke the words, she felt the weight of their impossibility. She wasn't his mother. She wasn't even family. She was a hired professional who was supposed to provide medical care and leave, not stand in this beautiful nursery feeling her heart break into pieces for a child who needed more than medicine could give. Oliver's crying had evolved throughout the afternoon, from the sharp, demanding wails of hunger or discomfort to something deeper, more primal. This was the cry of abandonment, of a soul calling out for connection in a world that felt cold and empty. Dr. Washington had heard it before in the NICU, in children whose parents couldn't or wouldn't hold them. But this was different. This was Oliver, the baby she'd been carrying for 3 times a week for 3 months, the child who had somehow wrapped himself around her heart despite every professional boundary she tried to maintain. She checked her watch again. 3:15 p.m. Jonathan Pemberton's flight from London wasn't due until evening, and even then, his assistant had mentioned he'd probably go straight to his Manhattan penthouse. Margaret wouldn't return from her errands until after 4. They were alone, she and this beautiful, broken little boy who needed something she wasn't supposed to give. Oliver's cries crescendoed again, his small body arching against her chest in desperate need. Dr. Washington felt tears threatening as she tried everything she could think of. She'd changed his diaper twice, checked his temperature 3 times, offered him formula he refused to take. She'd sung every lullaby she knew, tried different holding positions, even called her medical mentor for advice. Nothing worked. "What is it, baby?" she whispered, sinking into the plush rocking chair beside the window. "Tell me what you need." As if in response, Oliver turned his face toward her chest, his tiny mouth rooting instinctively, seeking comfort in the most primal way possible. Dr. Washington's breath caught in her throat. She knew that gesture, had seen it countless times in her practice. But this felt different, personal, dangerous. Her body responded before her mind could intervene. She felt the familiar tingle, the biological response she'd thought had disappeared after her own loss 2 years ago. Since her miscarriage, she'd assumed that part of her had died along with her dreams of motherhood. But holding Oliver, feeling his desperate need, something awakened in her that transcended medical training and professional boundaries. "This is insane," she thought, her heart pounding. "I could lose my license. I could lose everything." But Oliver's cries grew more desperate, and she felt something inside her chest, a fullness, a readiness that shouldn't have been possible. Her body was responding to this child's need in ways that defied logic and medical explanation. Dr. Washington looked around the empty nursery, her mind racing through the implications. She was a pediatrician, sworn to heal and protect children. Oliver was suffering, not from any physical ailment she could treat with medication, but from a deep emotional wound that traditional medicine couldn't touch. He needed comfort, connection, the kind of intimate care that only a mother could provide. But his mother was gone, and his father was thousands of miles away, building walls between himself and the child who needed him most. With trembling hands, she unbuttoned her coral blazer, then slowly unfastened the top buttons of her white silk blouse. Her medical training screamed warnings about appropriate boundaries, but her heart whispered something different. Sometimes healing required going beyond what textbooks taught. "Just this once," she whispered to Oliver, whose cries had softened as if he sensed something changing. "Just to help you feel safe, sweet boy." She positioned him carefully, the way she'd learned during her pediatric rotation in the NICU, the way she dreamed of holding her own child before that dream was torn away. Oliver's tiny mouth found what it sought, and immediately, miraculously, the crying stopped. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft sounds of contentment from the baby and the gentle patter of rain against the windows. Dr. Washington felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she experienced something she'd never expected to feel again, the deep, primal satisfaction of nourishing a child, of providing the most basic human comfort. Oliver's small hand rested against her chest, his eyes fluttering closed in the first peaceful sleep she'd witnessed since beginning his care. His breathing evened out, his tiny body finally relaxing in her arms. For the first time in months, he looked like what he was, a beautiful, perfect baby who was loved. This is what he needed, she realized, rocking gently back and forth. Not another medical exam or prescription. He needed to feel connected, to know that someone cared enough to give him everything. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, and late afternoon sunlight filtered through the nursery windows, casting everything in a golden glow. Dr. Washington felt a peace she hadn't experienced since her own loss, as if some broken part of her soul was healing along with Oliver's. She didn't hear the front door open downstairs. Didn't hear the quiet footsteps on the marble staircase. Didn't notice the tall figure that appeared silently in the nursery doorway, drawn by the unusual quiet where he'd expected to hear his son's cries. Jonathan Pemberton had come home early, guilt and Margaret's increasingly worried phone calls finally overwhelming his need to avoid the memories that lived in this house. He'd expected to find chaos, Oliver crying, Dr. Washington struggling to manage his inconsolable son, perhaps another recommendation that he hire additional help or consider other options. Instead, he found the most beautiful scene he could have imagined. Dr. Washington sat in the rocking chair, bathed in golden afternoon light, his son peaceful in her arms in a way Jonathan had never witnessed. Her dark hair had come loose from its professional style, framing her face with soft curls. Her eyes were closed, a serene smile on her lips as she hummed something soft and melodic. Oliver was completely relaxed, one tiny hand resting trustingly against her chest, his breathing deep and even. But it was more than the peaceful scene that stopped Jonathan in his tracks. It was the intimacy of it, the profound connection between this woman and his child that spoke to something he'd thought died with Catherine. Dr. Washington wasn't just caring for Oliver. She was loving him, nurturing him in ways that went far beyond medical necessity. Jonathan's breath caught as he realized what he was witnessing. Dr. Washington had crossed every professional boundary to give his son what he needed most, a mother's love. The sight should have shocked him, should have raised questions about appropriateness and professional ethics. Instead, it filled him with something he hadn't felt in months: hope. For the first time since Catherine's death, Oliver looked completely at peace. And Dr. Washington, this brilliant, compassionate woman who had somehow become the center of his son's world, looked like she belonged there, like she was meant to be holding his child, meant to be in his life. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was falling in love with his son's doctor. Had been falling for weeks, maybe months, through Margaret's updates and brief encounters in the hallway. But seeing her like this, seeing how she loved Oliver without reservation, without payment, without any obligation beyond the calling of her heart, he knew his feelings had moved far beyond mere attraction. He stood frozen in the doorway, afraid to move and break the spell, afraid to interrupt this moment of perfect peace. But as he watched, Dr. Washington's eyes opened and met his across the room. Time stopped. Their gazes held, and in that instant, everything changed. The air between them crackled with unspoken understanding, with the recognition of something neither had been looking for but both desperately needed. She didn't pull away, didn't cover herself or make excuses. Instead, she looked at him with complete honesty, her eyes saying what her voice couldn't: "This is what your son needed. This is what love looks like." Jonathan felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling, 3 months of grief and guilt and fear dissolving in the face of this woman's courage and compassion. She had given his son something he couldn't: unconditional love. And in doing so, she had given Jonathan something he thought he'd lost forever: the possibility of healing, of family, of love that transcended circumstances and expectations. Neither of them spoke. The moment was too fragile, too precious to disturb with words. But in the golden light of that November afternoon, with Oliver sleeping peacefully between them, both Dr. Camille Washington and Jonathan Pemberton understood that their lives had just changed forever. The rain had stopped completely now, and through the windows, the first hints of evening painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. In the quiet nursery, a new kind of family was being born, not through blood or marriage or social convention, but through love that dared to cross every boundary that stood in its way. The silence stretched between them for what felt like an eternity, broken only by Oliver's soft breathing and the distant tick of the grandfather clock downstairs. Dr. Camille Washington felt her professional world tilting off its axis as she met Jonathan Pemberton's intense green eyes across the nursery. He looked different than she remembered from their brief encounters in the hallway months ago. The expensive suit was wrinkled from travel, his dark hair disheveled, and there was something raw and vulnerable in his expression that made her heart race in ways that had nothing to do with being caught in a compromising position. Say something, she told herself, but words felt impossible. How could she explain what she'd just done? How could she justify crossing every professional boundary she'd sworn to uphold? Jonathan took a slow step into the room, his movements careful, as if he might spook a wild animal. "Dr. Washington," he said softly, his voice hoarse with emotion. I came home early." The sound of his voice broke the spell. Reality crashed back into the golden afternoon like a bucket of ice water. Dr. Washington carefully shifted Oliver in her arms, trying to maintain her dignity while discreetly adjusting her blouse. Her hands trembled as she worked to restore some semblance of professional appearance. "Mr. Pemberton," she managed, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "I wasn't expecting you until this evening." "Brilliant, Camille. State the obvious, why don't you?" She stood slowly from the rocking chair, Oliver still peaceful in her arms, and felt the weight of Jonathan's gaze following her every movement. The nursery that had felt so intimate and safe moments before now felt charged with tension and unspoken questions. "The London meetings finished ahead of schedule," Jonathan said, but his eyes never left her face. Margaret called. She said Oliver was having a difficult day. Dr. Washington nodded, focusing on the sleeping baby to avoid looking directly at Jonathan. He was distressed. Very distressed. "I tried everything. Checked for fever, ear infection, signs of colic. Medically, he's perfect. But emotionally..." She trailed off, unsure how to explain without sounding like she was criticizing his parenting. "Emotionally, he's starving," Jonathan finished quietly, and the pain in his voice made her look up despite herself. Their eyes met again, and she saw something that surprised her. Understanding, not anger. Guilt, not judgment. Jonathan Pemberton looked like a man who knew exactly what his son had been missing, and it wasn't medical care. "Mr. Pemberton, I need to explain," she began, but he held up a hand. "Jonathan," he said. "Please. And you don't need to explain anything. I saw how peaceful he looked. I've never seen him like that." The admission hung between them, loaded with implications that made Dr. Washington's pulse quicken. She carefully placed Oliver in his crib, the baby stirring slightly but remaining asleep. When she turned back to face Jonathan, she'd managed to button her blouse and smooth her hair, but she knew her professional armor was cracked beyond repair. "What I did was inappropriate," she said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I crossed boundaries that exist for good reasons. I should." "You should what?" Jonathan interrupted, taking another step closer. "Apologize for giving my son what I've been too much of a coward to provide? For showing him the kind of love I've been running from for 3 months. His words hit her like a physical blow. She'd expected anger, threats to her license, immediate termination. Instead, she was seeing a man stripped of pretense, raw with grief and guilt and something else she didn't dare name. "You don't understand," she said, backing toward the window. "I'm his doctor. There are ethical guidelines, professional standards. What I did could cost me my medical license." "It could." "It could what?" Jonathan's voice grew stronger, more insistent. "Save my son from feeling abandoned? Give him the comfort he's been crying for since birth? Show him that someone in this world actually cares enough to put his needs first?" Dr. Washington felt tears threatening again. "It's not that simple, Mr. Pemberton. Jonathan, I have a practice to consider, a reputation. I can't just..." She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Because the truth was, holding Oliver had felt like the most natural thing in the world. More natural than any medical procedure she'd ever performed, More right than any professional achievement she'd earned. Can't just what? Jonathan pressed, moving closer still. Can't care about him? Because it's too late for that, isn't it? You already do. His words struck too close to home. Dr. Washington turned to stare out the window at the estate's manicured grounds, trying to regain her professional composure. My feelings aren't relevant here. What matters is providing appropriate medical care within ethical boundaries. Appropriate medical care, Jonathan repeated, and she could hear the bitter laugh in his voice. You mean the kind of care that would let him cry himself sick while his father hides in boardrooms and his doctor maintains professional distance? She whirled around, anger flashing in her dark eyes. Don't you dare question my medical judgment. I've done everything possible for Oliver within appropriate parameters. The fact that you've been absent for every single appointment, every milestone, every moment he's needed his father. You think I don't know that? Jonathan's voice rose, then immediately softened as he glanced at the sleeping baby. You think I don't hate myself for it every single day? The raw pain in his voice stopped her cold. She saw him clearly for the first time, not the absent wealthy father she'd resented, but a man drowning in grief and guilt, using work to avoid confronting the loss that had shattered his world. Then why? She whispered. Why stay away from him? Jonathan ran a hand through his dark hair, looking suddenly exhausted. Because every time I look at him, I see Catherine dying. I hear her last words telling me to take care of him, and I know I'm failing her. I know I'm failing him. And it's easier to pay someone else to be what he needs than to face how broken I am. The honesty in his admission hit Dr. Washington like a wave. She'd been so focused on Oliver's needs that she'd never considered the depth of Jonathan's trauma. Losing a spouse in childbirth, becoming a single father while grieving, it was more than most people could handle. You're not broken, she said softly, the fight draining out of her. You're grieving. There's a difference. Is there? Jonathan laughed bitterly. Because from where I'm standing, watching another woman love my son better than I can, it feels pretty broken. I don't love him better than you can, Dr. Washington protested. I love him differently. The way someone loves a child who isn't theirs, who they have no claim to, who they'll eventually have to walk away from. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Because walking away from Oliver, and from whatever was happening between her and Jonathan in this charged moment, felt impossible now. What if you didn't have to? Jonathan asked quietly. Dr. Washington's breath caught. What? Walk away. What if you didn't have to walk away? The question was loaded with possibility, with implications that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog of attraction and emotion that was clouding her judgment. Mr. Pemberton. Jonathan. Jonathan, she corrected, his name feeling strange and intimate on her lips. What happened here today? It can't happen again. I need to maintain professional boundaries. For Oliver's sake, for both of our sakes. Professional boundaries, he repeated, moving closer until she could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. Is that what you were thinking about when you were comforting my son? When you were giving him exactly what he needed? I was thinking about helping a child in distress, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Were you? Jonathan's voice was soft, hypnotic. Or were you thinking about what it felt like to hold him? To feel needed, wanted, loved? His words hit too close to the truth. Dr. Washington had felt all of those things and more in Oliver's arms. For the first time since her miscarriage, she'd felt whole, complete, like the mother she'd always dreamed of being. It doesn't matter what I was thinking, she said, trying to inject steel into her voice. What matters is that it was inappropriate, and it won't happen again. Won't it? Jonathan was close enough now that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Because I don't think either of us believes that. Dr. Washington lifted her chin, calling on every ounce of professional training she possessed. I'm Oliver's pediatrician, Mr. Pemberton. Nothing more, nothing less. I'll continue to provide medical care for him, but within appropriate boundaries. What happened today was an aberration, a moment of poor judgment that I deeply regret. The words felt like lies even as she spoke them, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact, to project the confidence and professionalism that had gotten her through medical school and residency and building her practice. Jonathan studied her face for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he could see right through her carefully constructed facade. Then he stepped back, giving her space to breathe, but the intensity in his eyes didn't diminish. Of course, he said formally. I understand completely, Dr. Washington. Professional boundaries. Appropriate medical care. Nothing more. But the way he said it made it clear he understood exactly the opposite, that what had happened between them in this nursery had changed everything, regardless of what either of them claimed to believe. Dr. Washington gathered her blazer and medical bag with shaking hands, desperate to escape before her resolve crumbled completely. I'll see myself out. Oliver should sleep peacefully for several hours. Call me if there are any concerns. Dr. Washington, Jonathan's voice stopped her at the nursery door. She turned back reluctantly, knowing she should just keep walking but unable to resist one last look at the man who had somehow managed to crack her professional armor in the span of a single conversation. Thank you, he said simply, for taking care of him. For everything. The genuine gratitude in his voice nearly undid her. Dr. Washington nodded once, not trusting her voice, and fled the nursery before she could do something even more unprofessional than what she'd already done. Like admitting that she was already half in love with both the father and his son. The first snowflake fell as Dr. Camille Washington pulled out of the Pemberton Estate's circular driveway, her hands gripping the steering wheel of her silver Honda Accord tighter than necessary. The November sky had darkened to an ominous steel gray, and the weather forecast she'd ignored that morning was apparently about to make itself known in the most inconvenient way possible. Just get home, she told herself, trying to push the image of Jonathan's intense green eyes from her mind. Get home, pour a glass of wine, and pretend today never happened. But as she turned onto the main road leading back toward Hartford, the snow began falling in earnest. What had started as delicate flakes quickly became a wall of white that made the road ahead nearly invisible. Her phone buzzed with an emergency weather alert, winter storm warning, heavy snow and dangerous driving conditions expected. Avoid unnecessary travel. Perfect, she muttered, slowing to a crawl as her wipers struggled against the accumulating snow. Just perfect. 10 minutes later, as she tried to navigate a curve that had become a skating rink, her car slid sideways and came to rest in a snowbank with a soft thump. The engine sputtered and died. Dr. Washington sat in the sudden silence, watching snow pile up on her windshield, and felt the universe laughing at her attempts to maintain professional distance. She was stranded exactly 2.3 miles from the Pemberton estate. She knew because she'd driven this route dozens of times over the past 3 months. Her phone showed no signal. After 15 minutes of failed attempts to rock the car free and 3 different tow companies telling her they weren't sending trucks out in these conditions, she faced the inevitable reality. She was going to have to call the one person she'd just sworn to keep at professional distance. The estate's landline rang 4 times before Jonathan's voice answered, slightly breathless. Pemberton residence. Mr. Pemberton, it's Dr. Washington. She forced professionalism into her voice, despite the humiliation burning in her cheeks. I'm terribly sorry to bother you, but I'm stranded on Mill Road about 2 miles from your house. My car slid into a snowbank and... Are you hurt? His immediate concern cut through her prepared speech. No, I'm fine. Just stuck. I called several tow services, but they're not operating in these conditions. I'll try to arrange something in the morning, but I wanted to let you know in case you need to reach me about Oliver tonight. Absolutely not. His voice was firm. You're not spending the night in your car in a blizzard. I'm coming to get you. Mr. Pemberton, that's really not necessary. Jonathan. And yes, it is necessary. Stay with your car. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead before she could protest further. Dr. Washington stared at her phone, torn between gratitude and dread. She'd just spent the afternoon trying to rebuild professional walls between them, and now she was going to be rescued like some damsel in distress. The irony wasn't lost on her. True to his word, Jonathan appeared exactly 9 minutes later in a massive black Range Rover that handled the snow-covered road like it was merely a suggestion. He pulled up behind her car and stepped out into the storm, and Dr. Washington felt her breath catch at the sight of him. He'd changed from his travel-wrinkled suit into dark jeans and a thick emerald sweater that made his eyes look impossibly green even in the gray afternoon light. Snowflakes caught in his dark hair as he approached her driver's side window, and when he knocked, his smile held both concern and something warmer that made her pulse quicken. "Come on," he called through the glass. "Let's get you somewhere warm." She grabbed her medical bag and purse, locked her car, and accepted his offered hand as she navigated the slippery ground between vehicles. The brief contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, and she noticed he held on just a moment longer than strictly necessary before helping her into the passenger seat of his SUV. "Thank you," she said as he climbed back into the driver's seat, bringing the scent of snow and expensive cologne with him. "I really appreciate this. I'll arrange for a hotel in town once the roads." "Don't be ridiculous," Jonathan said, starting the engine. "You're staying at the house tonight. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for Oliver." Dr. Washington opened her mouth to protest, then closed it as she watched the storm intensify outside the windows. Professional boundaries were one thing, but freezing to death in a blizzard was quite another. "Just for tonight," she conceded. "Until the roads are passable." "Just for tonight," Jonathan agreed, but something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely unhappy about the arrangement. The drive back to the estate took twice as long as usual, with Jonathan navigating carefully through increasingly treacherous conditions. The silence between them was charged with unspoken tension, and Dr. Washington found herself stealing glances at his profile as he concentrated on the road. "How's Oliver?" she asked, desperate to redirect her thoughts to safer territory. "Still sleeping," Jonathan replied. "Peacefully. More peacefully than I've seen him since." He paused. "Since ever, actually." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Dr. Washington stared out at the swirling snow, remembering the weight of the baby in her arms, the contentment on his tiny face, the way Jonathan had looked at both of them in that moment. "Children respond to love," she said quietly. "Even very young ones can sense when they're truly cared for." "Is that your medical opinion, Dr. Washington?" There was something teasing in his voice that made her look at him. "Camille," she said before she could stop herself. "And yes, it's my medical opinion. Studies show that infants who receive consistent nurturing care develop stronger emotional regulation and attachment patterns." "Camille," Jonathan repeated, and her name sounded different in his deep voice, more intimate somehow. "That's a beautiful name." "It was my grandmother's," she said, then immediately wondered why she'd shared that personal detail. They pulled into the estate's circular driveway, and Dr. Washington realized that in all her visits, she'd never actually entered through the front door. She'd always used the side entrance that led directly to the family wing where Oliver's nursery was located. The main entrance was even more imposing than she'd imagined. Massive oak doors flanked by marble columns, with warm light spilling from tall windows that made the house look welcoming despite its grandeur. "Margaret's already preparing the blue guest room," Jonathan said as he helped her from the SUV. "It's on the same floor as the nursery, in case Oliver needs you during the night." The thoughtfulness of the arrangement touched her more than it should have. As they hurried through the snow toward the front door, she noticed that Jonathan's hand hovered protectively at the small of her back, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. Inside, the house felt different in the evening light. Where it had seemed cold and museum-like during her daytime visits, now it felt warm and inviting. Fires crackled in multiple fireplaces, soft music played from hidden speakers, and the smell of something delicious drifted from what she assumed was the kitchen. "Margaret's making her famous beef stew," Jonathan explained, noticing her expression. "She insisted on cooking for 3 when I called to say you'd be staying. She's quite fond of you, you know." "She's lovely," Dr. Washington said, then stopped abruptly as a woman in her 60s appeared from a side hallway. "Dr. Washington." Margaret's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I'm so glad you're safe. This storm came out of nowhere. I've put fresh towels in your room and found some clothes that should fit if you'd like to change into something more comfortable." "That's very kind, but I don't want to impose." "Nonsense," Margaret interrupted with the authority of someone who'd been managing households longer than Dr. Washington had been alive. "Mr. Jonathan, show her to her room. Dinner will be ready in an hour." As they climbed the main staircase, Dr. Washington became acutely aware of the intimacy of the situation. She was about to spend the night in Jonathan Pemberton's house, wearing borrowed clothes, sharing meals like they were, what? Friends? Something more? "Here we are," Jonathan said, opening a door to reveal a spacious room decorated in soothing blues and whites. A fire crackled in a small fireplace, and through the tall windows, she could see the storm raging outside. "The nursery is just down the hall if you want to check on Oliver before dinner." He lingered in the doorway, and Dr. Washington felt the same electric tension that had filled the nursery earlier. In the soft light of the guest room, with snow swirling outside and the rest of the world feeling very far away, it was easy to forget all the reasons why this was complicated. "Jonathan," she began, then stopped, unsure what she wanted to say. "I know," he said quietly. "Professional boundaries. Appropriate distance. I remember." But neither of them moved to create that distance. Instead, they stood there in the doorway, the space between them charged with possibility and desire, and all the things they weren't supposed to be feeling. "The storm should pass by morning," Dr. Washington finally managed. "Yes," Jonathan agreed. "By morning." But something in his voice suggested that morning felt very far away, and that neither of them was entirely sure they wanted it to come. Dinner had been a carefully orchestrated dance of polite conversation and stolen glances. Margaret's beef stew was indeed legendary, but Dr. Washington barely tasted it, too aware of Jonathan sitting across from her at the smaller dining table, not the formal one that could seat 20, but an intimate round table near the windows where they could watch the snow continue its relentless assault on the Connecticut landscape. Now wearing borrowed clothes that belonged to Catherine, a soft cashmere sweater in deep purple and dark jeans that fit surprisingly well, she found herself in Jonathan's study, nursing a glass of red wine while he stoked the fire. The room was different from the rest of the house, more personal. Medical journals sat beside business magazines on the coffee table, and she noticed several pediatric care books mixed in with financial reports. "You've been reading about infant development," she observed, nodding toward the stack of books. Jonathan straightened from the fireplace, his face slightly flushed from the heat and wine. "Trying to. I figured if I was going to be completely useless as a father, I should at least understand what I was failing at." The self-deprecation in his voice made her chest tighten. "You're not useless, Jonathan. You're grieving." "Am I?" He moved to the window, staring out at the storm. Or am I just a coward who can't bear to look at his son because it reminds me that my wife is dead? The rawness in his admission hung between them like a challenge. Dr. Washington set down her wineglass and stood, professional instincts warring with personal ones. "Tell me about Catherine," she said gently. Jonathan was quiet for so long she wondered if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "She wanted children more than anything. We tried for 3 years before she got pregnant with Oliver." He turned from the window, his green eyes bright with unshed tears. She used to talk to him constantly when she was carrying him. Read him stories, played classical music, decorated his nursery 3 times because she couldn't decide on the perfect theme. Dr. Washington remained silent, recognizing the need to let him purge the pain he'd been carrying. The pregnancy was perfect. Textbook. No complications, no warning signs. She was glowing radiant, planning every detail of his life. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists. Then during labor, something went wrong. Placental abruption. Massive hemorrhaging. The doctors tried everything. "Jonathan." Dr. Washington stepped closer, her heart breaking for the pain etched across his features. Her last words were, "Take care of our baby. Love him enough for both of us." He laughed bitterly. "Love him enough for both of us. And I can't even love him enough for myself. Every time I look at Oliver, I see her face, hear her voice, remember that she died bringing him into this world." "So you hired me," Dr. Washington said quietly, understanding finally clicking into place. "Not just for medical care, but to be what you couldn't be." "I hired the best pediatrician in Connecticut because my son deserves the best care," Jonathan said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "I didn't expect." "What?" "I didn't expect you." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "I didn't expect to find myself thinking about you when I should be thinking about quarterly reports. I didn't expect to rush home from Tokyo because I couldn't stand another day away from Oliver," she finished for him. "From both of you," he corrected, and the admission hung in the air between them like a confession. Dr. Washington felt her breath catch. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, what she'd tried to prevent with professional boundaries and careful distance. But standing here in his study, wearing his dead wife's clothes, with snow trapping them together in this beautiful empty house, those boundaries felt as fragile as spun glass. "Jonathan, I can't be her replacement," she said softly. "I can't be the mother Oliver lost or the wife you're grieving. I'm not asking you to be." His voice was rough with emotion. "I'm asking you to be yourself. The woman who sings lullabies in 3 languages, who knows exactly how to hold a crying baby, who looks at my son like he's the most precious thing in the world." Heat flooded Dr. Washington's cheeks as she realized how much he'd been watching, how much he'd seen during his brief visits home. "I was just doing my job." "Were you? This afternoon, when you—" He stopped, searching for words. "When you fed him, was that just professional duty?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to face fully. Dr. Washington turned away, moving to the mantelpiece where family photos displayed happier times. Jonathan and Catherine on their wedding day, Catherine glowing with pregnancy, moments of a life that seemed impossibly perfect until tragedy struck. "You want to know why I became a pediatrician?" she heard herself saying, her voice steadier than she felt. 2 years ago, I was 7 months pregnant. The baby was perfect, a little girl. We'd picked out names, painted the nursery, bought enough clothes for triplets. Jonathan's sharp intake of breath told her he understood where this was going. "Stillborn," she continued, touching Catherine's photo gently. "No warning, no explanation. Sometimes these things just happen, the doctors said. Sometimes there's no reason, no one to blame, nothing that could have been done differently. Camille. Jonathan's voice was soft behind her. Marcus, my fiancé, couldn't handle it. He said I was too broken, too obsessed with trying to save every child I met because I couldn't save our daughter. She turned to face him, tears threatening. He wasn't wrong. I threw myself into pediatrics afterward, thinking I could heal other people's children if I couldn't have my own. Is that what you're doing with Oliver? Trying to save him because you couldn't save your daughter? The question hit like a physical blow, mainly because she'd asked herself the same thing dozens of times. Maybe. At first. But Oliver. She paused, struggling for honesty. He's not a substitute for what I lost. He's himself. A beautiful, innocent child who deserves love and care and attention. And today, when he was crying and nothing I tried worked, I didn't think about medical protocols or professional boundaries. I just thought about a baby who needed comfort. And you gave it to him, Jonathan said, moving closer. You gave him what I couldn't. Because you're afraid, Dr. Washington said gently. Not because you don't love him, but because loving him feels like betraying Catherine's memory. Like moving forward means leaving her behind. The accuracy of her assessment hit him visibly. Jonathan sank into one of the leather chairs by the fire, suddenly looking older than his 35 years. She made me promise, he said quietly. Before she lost consciousness, she made me promise to love our baby, to be the father she knew I could be. And I can't even hold him without falling apart. Dr. Washington knelt beside his chair, her medical training and personal experience guiding her. Grief isn't linear, Jonathan. There's no timeline for healing, no moment when you suddenly stop missing her. But Catherine didn't ask you to stop grieving. She asked you to love Oliver. How do I do that when every time I look at him, I see what I lost? By looking harder, she said softly. Oliver isn't just Catherine's legacy. He's his own person, with his own personality, his own needs, his own future. And that future includes having a father who's present, not just financially but emotionally. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside the study, something had shifted. The weight of secrets shared, of pain acknowledged, of two broken people recognizing their brokenness in each other. I watched you today, he said finally. The way you held him, the way you looked at him. Like he was the most important thing in the world. He is important, Dr. Washington replied. Every child is. But Oliver is special to you. I can see it. She couldn't deny it. Over 3 months of caring for him, of watching him grow and develop, of being his primary source of comfort and affection, Oliver had carved out a space in her heart she'd thought permanently closed. Yes, she admitted. He's special to me. And me. Jonathan's voice was barely audible. Am I special to you too? The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Dr. Washington looked into his eyes and saw not just grief and guilt, but hope. Tentative, fragile hope that maybe, despite everything that stood between them, something beautiful could grow from shared pain. Yes, she whispered, and felt something fundamental shift in the space between them. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, two hearts that had been broken in different ways began the delicate process of healing together. The real question now was whether they'd have the courage to face what came next. What do you think? Can two wounded hearts truly heal each other, or do we need to heal ourselves first? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories that explore the complex journey of love and loss. The next morning arrived with crystalline sunlight streaming through the mansion's windows, transforming the snow-covered estate into something magical. Dr. Washington woke in the guest bedroom to the sound of Oliver's contented babbling from the nursery, a sound she'd rarely heard in 3 months of caring for him. She found Jonathan already there, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled dress shirt but with his sleeves rolled up, holding Oliver against his chest while the baby grasped at his father's fingers with surprising strength. "Good morning," Jonathan said softly, not wanting to break the spell that seemed to have settled over them overnight. He woke up happy. Actually happy. "I've been holding him for 20 minutes, and he hasn't cried once." Dr. Washington felt her heart do something dangerous as she watched them together. Oliver's tiny fist was wrapped around Jonathan's index finger, and for the first time since she'd known them, father and son looked like they belonged together. "He knows," she said, moving closer to check Oliver's alertness and responsiveness with professional habit. "Babies are incredibly perceptive. He can sense the change in you." "What change?" Jonathan asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. "You're present. Really present. Not just physically in the room, but emotionally available." She touched Oliver's forehead gently, noting the relaxed set of his features. "Yesterday you were a stranger who shared his DNA. Today you're his father." The words hung between them, weighted with significance neither had expected to feel so soon. Jonathan shifted Oliver to his shoulder, and the baby settled there like he'd been waiting his whole 3 months of life for exactly this moment. "Dr. Washington," Margaret's voice called from downstairs. "The roads are still impassable, but I've prepared breakfast. Will you and Mr. Pemberton be joining us?" "We'll be right down," Jonathan called back, then looked at Dr. Washington with something that might have been shyness. Would you mind if we had breakfast together? All 3 of us? Like a family," she finished, and immediately wondered if she'd overstepped. But Jonathan's smile, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him, told her she hadn't. Yes, like a family. 20 minutes later, they sat in the sunny breakfast nook, Oliver content in his bouncy seat between them while Margaret served fresh blueberry pancakes and perfectly crispy bacon. The domestic scene felt surreal after months of clinical appointments and professional distance. "He's watching you," Dr. Washington observed as Oliver's eyes tracked Jonathan's movements. "Babies his age are just starting to really focus on faces, recognize patterns. He's learning who you are." Jonathan offered Oliver his finger again, marveling when the baby immediately grasped it. "I missed so much already." His first smile, his first laugh. "Does he laugh yet?" "Not full laughs, but he makes happy sounds when he's content." Dr. Washington pulled out her phone. "I took some videos during appointments. Would you like to see them?" For the next hour, they huddled together over her phone, watching months of Oliver's development unfold. Jonathan's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions: wonder, regret, joy, determination. When a video showed Oliver making his first attempts at rolling over, Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. "I should have been here," he whispered. "You're here now," Dr. Washington said gently. "That's what matters." After breakfast, Jonathan surprised her by suggesting they take Oliver for a walk around the estate. The storm had passed, leaving the world blanketed in pristine snow that sparkled like diamonds under the winter sun. "Are you sure?" "It's quite cold," Dr. Washington protested, though she was already mentally calculating how to bundle Oliver appropriately. "Catherine and I used to walk these grounds every morning when she was pregnant," Jonathan said, pulling on a heavy winter coat. "She always said she wanted to show Oliver the gardens in every season." They wrapped Oliver in layers of soft blankets, tucking him securely into his stroller. Dr. Washington wore another of Catherine's coats, a beautiful red wool that made her skin glow against the white landscape. She'd offered to change back into her own clothes, but Jonathan had quietly asked her not to. "They suit you," he'd said, and something in his tone told her this wasn't about replacing Catherine, but about moving forward. The estate was breathtaking in winter. Bare trees created intricate patterns against the sky, and the formal gardens lay sleeping under their snowy blanket, waiting for spring's awakening. They walked slowly, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air, taking turns pushing the stroller and making quiet observations about the landscape. "There's a pond back here," Jonathan said, guiding them down a winding path. Catherine wanted to teach Oliver to skip stones when he got older. They found the pond frozen solid, its surface like black glass under the ice. Dr. Washington could picture it in summer, lily pads and cattails, maybe a small dock where a child could sit and fish or simply dream. "It's beautiful," she said. "Peaceful." She designed most of these gardens herself, Jonathan said, pulling the stroller to a stop beside a snow-covered bench. Said she wanted Oliver to have places to explore, to discover, to feel connected to nature. Dr. Washington heard the past tense and the pain it carried, but also something new, pride in Catherine's vision, gratitude for her dreams rather than just grief for her loss. "She sounds like she was an amazing woman," Dr. Washington said carefully. She was. She would have been an incredible mother. Jonathan was quiet for a moment, then looked directly at her. "She would have liked you. The way you care for Oliver, the way you see him as a person rather than just a patient. She would have appreciated that." The words hit Dr. Washington with unexpected force. She'd been so worried about competing with a ghost, but Jonathan wasn't asking her to replace Catherine. He was acknowledging that love could expand, that caring for Oliver didn't diminish his wife's memory but honored it. They started back toward the house as Oliver began to fuss, his patience with the cold air wearing thin. But instead of the inconsolable crying that had marked his first 3 months, these were normal baby sounds, requests for warmth and food rather than desperate pleas for comfort. "He's different," Jonathan observed as they climbed the front steps. "Calmer. More settled." "Babies thrive on emotional security," Dr. Washington explained, though she suspected Jonathan already understood. "When the adults around them are calm and present, they feel safe." Inside, Margaret had prepared the living room with a soft blanket spread before the fireplace. Jonathan settled there with Oliver while Dr. Washington changed into comfortable clothes, her own jeans and a soft blue sweater she'd packed for overnight emergencies. When she returned, she found Jonathan lying on his stomach, holding a colorful toy just out of Oliver's reach while encouraging him to stretch for it. "Come on, buddy," Jonathan was saying. "You can do it. Reach for it." Oliver's little arms were moving with determination, his face serious with concentration. When he finally managed to bat at the toy, Jonathan's whoop of celebration made the baby startle, then break into the biggest smile Dr. Washington had ever seen from him. "Did you see that?" Jonathan said, looking up at her with pure joy. He smiled. A real smile. Dr. Washington felt her own smile bloom across her face. His first real social smile. "And it was for you." The afternoon passed in a blur of small moments that felt monumentally significant. Jonathan giving Oliver his first successful bottle feeding. Dr. Washington showing Jonathan how to properly support the baby's head during tummy time. The three of them napping together on the living room rug, Oliver sleeping peacefully between them while snow continued to fall outside. It was during one of these quiet moments, with Oliver dozing against Jonathan's chest and the fire crackling softly, that Dr. Washington realized something had fundamentally shifted. This wasn't just about professional care anymore, or even about healing from grief. This was about family, not the traditional kind formed by marriage and shared genetics, but the chosen kind formed by love and commitment and the willingness to show up for each other. "Camille," Jonathan said quietly, and she realized it was the first time he'd used her first name. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing him. For loving him when I couldn't. For showing me how to be his father." She looked at this man who 12 hours ago had been a grieving stranger, now cradling his son with the tender confidence of someone who'd finally found his way home. "Thank you for letting me," she said simply. Outside, the world remained frozen and still, but inside this house that had felt like a mausoleum just yesterday, something warm and alive was taking root. Something that looked remarkably like the beginning of love. The spell of their perfect snow day shattered at exactly 4:17 p.m. when the sound of car doors slamming echoed through the estate's circular driveway. Dr. Washington looked up from where she sat cross-legged on the living room floor, helping Oliver practice reaching for toys, to see Jonathan's face drain of color. "They're not supposed to be here until Christmas," he muttered, moving to the window. Through the glass, she could see a black Mercedes sedan and an elegant silver BMW parked behind her modest Honda Civic. My parents. And Catherine's mother. Dr. Washington felt ice form in her stomach. She'd been so lost in the warmth of their newfound connection that she'd forgotten the world outside existed, a world with expectations, judgments, and people who might not understand what they'd found together. "Should I?" She started to rise, but Jonathan caught her hand. "Stay. Please. Oliver needs you here." The front door opened with the authority of people who'd never learned to knock. Voices filled the foyer, cultured, commanding, and clearly displeased about something. "Jonathan." The first voice belonged to an older woman with the kind of crisp pronunciation that suggested private schools and country clubs. "Margaret said you were snowed in, but the roads have been clear for hours. We've been calling." "Hello, Mother," Jonathan said, lifting Oliver protectively as three figures appeared in the living room doorway. Dr. Washington had seen photos of Catherine around the house, so she recognized Eleanor Whitmore immediately, Catherine's mother, a striking woman in her 60s with silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the winter weather. She wore a black cashmere coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her blue eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Jonathan's parents flanked her, his father, Robert Pemberton, tall and distinguished with iron-gray hair and the same green eyes as his son, wearing a charcoal overcoat that screamed old money. His mother, Patricia, was petite and elegant in the way that suggested decades of yoga classes and spa treatments, her blonde hair styled in a timeless bob that had probably looked the same for 20 years. All three sets of eyes immediately locked onto Dr. Washington, and she felt their assessment like a physical weight. She was acutely aware of her jeans, her casual sweater, her natural hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Every inch of her screamed, "Doesn't belong here." "Jonathan," Patricia Pemberton said slowly, her gaze moving from Dr. Washington to the cozy scene they'd clearly interrupted, toys scattered on the expensive rug, throw pillows arranged for comfortable sitting on the floor, the intimate domesticity of a family at ease. "Would you like to explain what's happening here?" "This is Dr. Washington," Jonathan said, his voice carefully neutral. "Oliver's pediatrician." "We know who she is," Eleanor said coolly. "Margaret mentioned you'd been consulting with her frequently, but I wasn't aware house calls included overnight stays." The words hit like a slap. Dr. Washington felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice professionally calm. "The storm made travel impossible last night. I stayed to ensure Oliver's continued care." "How dedicated," Patricia said, and the word dripped with implication. Robert Pemberton stepped forward, his businessman's instincts clearly engaged. "Perhaps we could speak privately, Jonathan, about Oliver's ongoing care arrangements." "Anything you need to say can be said in front of Dr. Washington," Jonathan replied, and she heard the steel entering his voice. "She's been instrumental in Oliver's development." "Has she now?" Eleanor moved closer, her predatory smile reminding Dr. Washington uncomfortably of a shark. "And what exactly has this development entailed?" The question hung in the air like poison. Dr. Washington realized they'd walked into a trap, 3 months of private appointments, overnight stays, the obvious intimacy of the scene they discovered. To outside eyes, especially eyes already inclined toward suspicion, everything could be twisted into something ugly. Oliver has shown remarkable improvement in his emotional responsiveness, Dr. Washington said, falling back on medical terminology like armor. His attachment patterns have stabilized, his sleep cycles have normalized, and his social engagement has increased significantly. Social engagement? Eleanor's laugh was like breaking crystal. With whom? You. With his father, Dr. Washington said firmly. I've been helping Mr. Pemberton develop confidence in his parenting abilities. By playing house. Patricia's voice could have frozen summer. By wearing my daughter-in-law's clothes and pretending to be something you're not? Dr. Washington looked down at the red sweater she'd borrowed that morning, Catherine's sweater, and felt shame burn through her. She'd been so comfortable, so happy, that she'd forgotten she was an outsider wearing a dead woman's clothes in a world that would never truly accept her. "Mother," Jonathan said sharply, "that's enough." "Is it?" Robert Pemberton's voice carried the weight of boardroom authority. "Son, I understand you're grieving. We all are. Catherine was like a daughter to us, and her loss has been devastating. But this..." He gestured around the room, taking in the scene of domestic tranquility. "This isn't healing. This is replacement." "You don't know what you're talking about," Jonathan said, but Dr. Washington could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. "Don't I?" Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Dr. Washington with laser precision. "How long have you been planning this, Dr. Washington?" 3 months of private appointments with a grieving widower and his motherless child? How convenient that you were here when he was at his most vulnerable. "It's not like that," Dr. Washington protested, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. "Isn't it?" Patricia joined the attack. "A single woman, no family of her own that we can find, taking advantage of a man destroyed by grief? Inserting yourself into his life, into his child's life, until you become indispensable." Each word was a carefully aimed dart, hitting wounds Dr. Washington had carried for years. The implication that she was calculating, manipulative, using her medical position to seduce a patient's father, it was everything she'd feared people would think, everything that could destroy her career and her reputation. "You think I planned this?" Dr. Washington's voice cracked despite her efforts to stay calm. "You think I wanted to fall in love with a man whose wife's ghost lives in every room of this house? You think I enjoyed watching a baby cry for 3 months because his father was too broken to love him?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and the moment they hit the air, she knew she'd made a catastrophic mistake. She'd admitted to feelings she'd barely acknowledged to herself, confessed to crossing professional boundaries in front of 3 people who could end her career with a single phone call. "Ah," Eleanor said softly, triumph gleaming in her eyes. "There it is. You're in love with him. How perfectly predictable." Jonathan stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Stop this. All of you. Dr. Washington has done nothing but care for Oliver when I was too much of a coward to do it myself." "Has she?" Robert's voice was deadly quiet. "Or has she been grooming a vulnerable child to accept her as a mother figure while seducing his grieving father? It's textbook predatory behavior, Jonathan. Open your eyes." Dr. Washington felt the world spinning around her. Everything beautiful about the last 24 hours was being twisted into something sordid, something calculated. The breastfeeding incident, which had felt like the most natural thing in the world, now seemed inappropriate, boundary crossing. The clothes she'd borrowed became evidence of presumption. The family breakfast became proof of manipulation. "I should go," she whispered, moving toward Oliver to say goodbye. "Yes," Eleanor said coldly. "You should." And you shouldn't come back. She's Oliver's doctor, Jonathan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Not anymore, Patricia said firmly. We'll find someone appropriate. Someone professional. Dr. Washington knelt beside Oliver, who was lying on his back, reaching for a colorful toy mobile. His bright eyes focused on her face, and he smiled, that same beautiful smile he'd given his father earlier. The smile that had taken 3 months to achieve, 3 months of patient care and growing love. Goodbye, sweet boy, she whispered, touching his soft cheek. Be happy. Be loved. She stood and faced Jonathan, seeing the conflict written across his features. Part of him wanted to fight for her, she could see it. But another part, the part that had been shaped by years of privilege and expectation, was already calculating the cost of choosing her over his family's approval. I'll send my medical notes to whatever pediatrician you choose, she said professionally, though her heart was breaking. Oliver's care shouldn't be interrupted because of personal complications. She gathered her things with as much dignity as she could manage, aware that 3 pairs of eyes were watching her every move, cataloging evidence of her unworthiness. At the door, she turned back one last time. Jonathan stood holding Oliver, surrounded by his family, looking every inch the wealthy widower who belonged in this world of privilege and expectation. For a moment, their eyes met, and she saw the man who had held her hand in the storm, who had discovered fatherhood in her arms. Then Patricia moved to stand beside him, a protective gesture that reminded Dr. Washington exactly where the battle lines were drawn. Goodbye, Mr. Pemberton, she said formally, and walked out into the cold winter afternoon, leaving behind the warmest days she'd experienced in years. Dr. Camille Washington sat in her Hartford apartment 3 days later, staring at the resignation letter she'd typed and retyped 17 times. Outside her window, the December snow fell steadily, each flake a reminder of that perfect morning when she believed love could conquer anything. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she couldn't bring herself to move from her kitchen table. Dr. Margaret Foster, Chief of Pediatrics, the letter began. I am writing to inform you of my decision to resign from my position at Connecticut Children's Medical Center, effective immediately. Recent personal circumstances have compromised my professional judgment. She deleted the last line again. How could she explain that she'd fallen in love with the patient's father? That she'd crossed every boundary she'd sworn to maintain? That the Pemberton family had every right to question her ethics, even if their methods had been cruel? Her phone buzzed for the 100th time in 3 days. Jonathan's name appeared on the screen, just as it had for every previous call she'd ignored. This time, though, he'd left a voicemail. Camille, please. We need to talk. What happened? What they said, it wasn't right. Oliver keeps looking for you. He cries every night now, and I don't know how to comfort him. I don't know how to comfort myself. Please call me back. His voice cracked on the last words, and she felt her resolve weaken. But then she remembered Eleanor Whitmore's cold smile, Patricia Pemberton's accusations, the way they'd made her feel like a predator stalking a vulnerable family. Maybe they're right, she thought, burying her face in her hands. Maybe I did cross lines that should never be crossed. Maybe I convinced myself it was love when it was really just loneliness and a desperate need to fill the hole in my heart. Her doorbell rang, startling her from her spiral of self-doubt. Through the peephole, she saw Margaret, the Pemberton household manager, standing in the hallway holding a large envelope. Dr. Washington? Margaret's voice was gentle through the door. I know you're in there. Your car's been in the same parking spot for 3 days. Reluctantly, Camille opened the door. Margaret looked older than she had just days ago, worn down by the tension that had invaded the estate. They sent you, Camille said, not really a question. No one sent me. I came because that baby is breaking my heart, and so is his father. Margaret stepped inside without invitation, setting the envelope on the coffee table. Mr. Jonathan hasn't slept since you left. He just stands in Oliver's nursery, holding him while they both cry. The image hit Camille like a physical blow. Margaret, I can't. What his family said, they're probably right. I crossed professional boundaries. I let my feelings. Your feelings. Margaret's laugh was sharp. Honey, you think you're the first person to fall in love with someone you were supposed to just help? You think love follows rules and timelines. She moved to the window, looking out at the snow. I worked for Mrs. Catherine's family for 10 years before she married Mr. Jonathan. Watched her grow up, watched her fall in love with him when she was supposed to marry some banker her parents chose. You think that family hasn't seen love cross boundaries before? Camille sank onto her couch, exhaustion weighing her down. But this is different. I'm his son's doctor. I have ethical obligations. And you fulfilled them, Margaret interrupted. That baby was dying of loneliness, Dr. Washington. Dying. And you saved him. You brought him back to life, and in doing so, you brought his father back too. She picked up the envelope, holding it out. This came to the house today. Mr. Jonathan doesn't know I took it. With trembling fingers, Camille opened the envelope. Inside was a formal letter from the Connecticut State Medical Board, responding to a complaint filed by Eleanor Whitmore regarding unethical conduct and boundary violations by Dr. Camille Washington in her treatment of the Pemberton family. The words blurred as she read them. Investigation pending. Professional conduct review. Possible license suspension. Her entire career, everything she'd worked for since losing her own baby, could be destroyed by 3 people who saw her as nothing more than an opportunistic interloper. They're trying to destroy me, she whispered. They're trying to control a situation they don't understand, Margaret corrected. But Mr. Jonathan, he's fighting back. Before Camille could ask what that meant, her phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Jonathan's name on the screen. It was her mentor, Dr. Foster. Dr. Washington? I've been trying to reach you for hours. Her voice was businesslike, but not unkind. We need to discuss the complaint that was filed against you. Camille's heart sank. Dr. Foster, I can explain. You don't need to explain anything to me. I've been in medicine for 30 years, and I've seen my share of ethics complaints. Most of them are filed by people who don't understand the difference between personal feelings and professional misconduct. The words didn't quite penetrate. I'm sorry. Jonathan Pemberton came to see me this morning. Brought his son with him, actually. Beautiful baby. Mr. Pemberton spent 2 hours explaining exactly what kind of doctor you are, what kind of person you are, and what you've meant to his family's healing process. Camille found herself unable to speak. He's also hired one of the best medical ethics attorneys in the state to fight this complaint. Apparently, he has some very strong feelings about people attacking your character. Margaret smiled knowingly from across the room. Dr. Foster, Camille managed, I did develop feelings for Mr. Pemberton. I can't deny that. Feelings aren't misconduct, Dr. Washington. Acting on those feelings inappropriately would be. But from what Mr. Pemberton described, you maintained your professional standards while providing exceptional care to his son. The fact that you also provided emotional support to a grieving father and found personal happiness in the process doesn't make you a predator. It makes you human. Tears she'd been holding back for 3 days finally spilled over. But the investigation will likely be dismissed once the board reviews the actual facts rather than the emotional accusations of grieving family members. Mr. Pemberton was quite thorough in his documentation. Apparently, he's kept detailed records of every appointment, every improvement in his son's condition, every professional recommendation you made. Margaret leaned forward. He's been building a case to defend you since the moment you walked out that door. Take some time, Dr. Foster continued. Deal with this situation. But don't resign over it. The medical community needs doctors who care as deeply as you do, even when, especially when, that caring leads to complicated personal situations. After hanging up, Camille sat in stunned silence. Jonathan was fighting for her. Fighting for them. Despite his family's disapproval, despite the potential scandal, despite everything. What do I do? She asked Margaret. That depends. Do you love him? The question was simple, but the answer felt like stepping off a cliff. Yes. Do you love that baby? Like he was my own. Then you fight. You fight for the family you found, the love you've built, and the life you deserve. Margaret stood, heading for the door. Mr. Jonathan is discovering what it means to choose love over expectation. Maybe it's time you did the same. Alone again, Camille walked to her bedroom and opened her closet. Hanging in the back was the red dress she'd bought for a medical conference last year but never worn. Too bold, too bright, too much like someone who believed she deserved beautiful things. She thought about Oliver's smile when he saw her, about Jonathan's hands in her hair as snow fell outside, about the family they could become if they were brave enough to fight for it. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman who had spent 2 years hiding from life, from love, from the possibility of loss. But some things were worth the risk of losing. Some love was worth fighting the whole world to keep. She reached for her phone and dialed Jonathan's number. Camille. He answered on the first ring, hope and desperation mixing in his voice. I'm coming home, she said simply. Home. To you. To Oliver. To us. She took a deep breath. If you still want me. His laugh was shaky with relief. I've been waiting for you to say that for 3 days. Jonathan, your family. My family doesn't get to choose who I love. And they don't get to destroy the woman who saved my son's life and taught me how to be a father. His voice grew stronger. I love you, Camille Washington. I love you, and I'm going to fight for you, for us, for the family we're building together. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but for the first time in days, it looked like promise instead of punishment. The snow had stopped falling by the time Dr. Camille Washington pulled into the circular driveway of the Pemberton estate on December 23rd. Christmas lights twinkled along the roofline, the first decoration she'd ever seen on the house, and warm golden light spilled from every window, transforming the mansion from a cold monument to wealth into something that actually looked like a home. She sat in her car for a moment, wearing that red dress she'd finally found the courage to put on, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 weeks had passed since that phone call, 3 weeks of fighting the medical board's investigation, of lawyers and depositions and character witnesses. But today, it was finally over. The front door opened before she could knock, and there was Jonathan, looking more alive than she'd ever seen him. His dark hair was actually styled for once, his green eyes bright with something she was learning to recognize as hope. He wore a soft gray sweater instead of his usual business suit, and in his arms was Oliver, who squealed with delight the moment he saw her. Mama. Oliver babbled, reaching his tiny arms toward her. At 9 months old, he was sitting up on his own, babbling constantly, and had learned to associate her voice with comfort and love. Did he just? Camille's voice caught as Jonathan passed the baby to her, Oliver immediately snuggling against her shoulder with a contented sigh. He's been saying it for 2 weeks, Jonathan said softly, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Margaret thinks he's been waiting for you to come home to say it properly. Home. The word settled around her like a warm blanket. She looked past Jonathan into the house and gasped. The sterile perfection was gone, replaced by the beautiful chaos of actual living. Toys scattered across Persian rugs, family photos on side tables, Christmas stockings hanging from the mantel. 3 of them, she noticed, with names embroidered in gold: Jonathan, Oliver, and Camille. "You bought me a stocking," she whispered. "I bought us a future," he corrected, leading her into the living room where a fire crackled in the hearth. Dr. Foster called this morning. The medical board officially dismissed all charges. Insufficient evidence of wrongdoing, exemplary patient care, and about 15 character witnesses who testified that you're the most ethical doctor they've ever worked with. Relief flooded through her so completely that her knees nearly buckled. "It's really over?" "The investigation?" "Yes. But not the fallout." His expression grew serious. "My mother called this morning. Apparently, Eleanor Whitmore is no longer welcome at family gatherings, and my sister Patricia wants to apologize to you personally. She said losing Catherine made her paranoid about anyone new entering our lives, and she realizes now that you weren't trying to replace anyone, you were just trying to heal us." Oliver chose that moment to grab a handful of Camille's hair and babble something that sounded remarkably like Pretty Mama, making them both laugh despite the serious conversation. "And your mother?" Camille asked, settling onto the couch with Oliver in her lap. "Still adjusting. But she spent an hour yesterday teaching Oliver how to clap his hands, and when he clapped for her, she cried. Happy tears," he added quickly. "She's beginning to understand that loving you doesn't diminish her love for Catherine. It just means our family is growing." Margaret appeared in the doorway carrying a tray of hot chocolate and cookies, beaming at the sight of them together. "About time you came home, Dr. Washington. This house has been too quiet without your laugh." As Margaret fussed over Oliver, Camille noticed the changes throughout the room. Catherine's portrait still hung above the mantel, but it was surrounded now by candid photos of Oliver. First smiles, first attempts at crawling, moments of joy that proved life continued even after devastating loss. "I was terrified you'd think I was trying to erase her memory," Camille admitted quietly. Jonathan shook his head, reaching over to trace Oliver's cheek with one finger. "Catherine would have loved you. She always said she wanted Oliver to grow up in a house full of laughter and music and people who weren't afraid to love deeply." His eyes met Camille's. She would have wanted him to have a mother who chose him, not just because she gave birth to him, but because she couldn't imagine life without him. Tears blurred Camille's vision. "I can't imagine life without either of you." "Good," Jonathan said, sliding off the couch to kneel beside her. "Because I have something to ask you, and I'm hoping you'll say yes." Oliver giggled and clapped his hands as Jonathan pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, as if he understood the significance of the moment. "Camille Washington," Jonathan's voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "3 months ago, you walked into our lives as a doctor. You healed my son, you taught me how to be a father, and you showed us both what love looks like when it's brave enough to cross every boundary." He opened the box to reveal a stunning sapphire ring surrounded by diamonds, blue like Oliver's eyes, like the scrubs she'd worn that first day, like the hope she'd carried even when everything seemed impossible. "I'm not asking you to marry just me. I'm asking you to marry us, to become the mother Oliver already knows you are, to build a family that chooses love over convention, healing over hiding." His voice broke slightly. "Will you marry me? Will you marry us?" Through her tears, Camille looked down at Oliver, who was reaching for the ring box with fascination, then back at Jonathan, whose entire future waited in her answer. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes to all of it. Yes to you, yes to Oliver, yes to this beautiful, complicated, perfect family we've created." Jonathan slipped the ring onto her finger as Oliver bounced in her lap, babbling his approval. Then Jonathan was kissing her, and she was laughing and crying at the same time, and Oliver was trying to grab both their faces, and Margaret was taking pictures from the doorway while wiping her own tears. "When?" Jonathan asked when they finally broke apart. "Spring," Camille said without hesitation. I want to marry you when everything is blooming, when the world is full of new beginnings. April, he agreed. In the garden behind the house. Small ceremony, just family and friends who understand that love doesn't follow rules. Dr. Foster will cry, Camille laughed. She loves weddings almost as much as she loves medical ethics victories. Speaking of which, Jonathan reached for another envelope from the coffee table. This came for you today. Camille opened it to find a formal letter from Connecticut Children's Medical Center, offering her the position of Chief of Pediatric Ethics, a newly created role that would involve teaching other doctors how to maintain professional boundaries while providing compassionate care. They want me to teach ethics? She asked incredulously. Apparently, surviving an ethics investigation with your reputation intact while managing to fall in love and save a family makes you uniquely qualified to help other doctors navigate similar situations, Jonathan grinned. Dr. Foster may have mentioned that you're living proof that caring deeply doesn't have to mean compromising professionally. Oliver chose that moment to crawl from Camille's lap to Jonathan's, then back to hers, as if claiming them both. His happy babbling filled the room, mixing with the sound of the fire crackling and snow beginning to fall again outside the windows. 1 year ago, I was convinced I'd never love again, Jonathan said softly, watching Oliver play with Camille's engagement ring. I thought love was something you got once, if you were lucky, and then spent the rest of your life mourning when it was gone. And now? Camille asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Now I know that love multiplies. That choosing to love again doesn't diminish what came before, it honors it. Catherine gave me Oliver, and Oliver brought me you, and you've given us both a future I never thought possible. As if summoned by their conversation, Oliver looked up at both of them and said, clear as day, Mama. Dada. Home. Yes, sweet boy, Camille whispered, gathering him close while Jonathan wrapped his arms around them both. We're home. Outside, Christmas lights twinkled in the snow, and inside the Pemberton estate, no longer a house but truly a home, 3 hearts beat in rhythm, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with a first meeting, but with a second chance at happiness that's brave enough to cross every line that matters. Love has a way of finding us when we least expect it and need it most. And if this story touched your soul, smash that like button, subscribe for more tales of love that conquers all, and share this with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Sometimes the family we choose is even more beautiful than the one we're born into. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.